great to see you here. It's nice to see a large, my students are in front too, a large collection of community members and also people here from Michigan Tech. We all have a deep interest in our environment here, and we are privileged to have a speaker who's been looking into the question of mining and the economic consequences, benefits, as well as consequences of mining, new mining in the Keweenaw. And we at Michigan Tech thought it would be wonderful to invite him to speak to our campus. So he's been on campus today, meeting with faculty and students. But let me just make a few introductions and also give you a couple of announcements. My name is Carol McLennan, and I work in the Social Sciences Department. And I'm part of the group that's sponsoring this series of events today. Dr. Tom Powers is here with us from the University of Minnesota. And did I say do that again? Yesterday or this afternoon I said Minnesota. I must have that on my mind. I'm not quite sure why. Sorry. University of Montana, right? Missoula. We're really pleased to have him. The Social Sciences Department is helping put this on, as is the Center for Water and Society and the School for Business and Economics. So we're pleased to have him here. He's here for several days to meet with community members concerning the research that he's done for Friends of the Land of the Keweenaw on economic issues regarding new mining in the Keweenaw area. And I have to say that there's a lot of interest in the community on this subject. It's very important that we all talk to one another about our interest in mining, as well as some of the issues that we may have with new mining in this area. And so we're doing our part to bring Tom Powers here. I have to mention that there is also several events going on this week with regard to mining. The Unitarian Universalists are having a mining forum on Sunday morning at 10:30. They've invited Russ Grunwald from the Keweenaw Copper to speak about the mining project, the potential mining project in the Keweenaw. And that's at 10:30 on Sunday at the BHK Auditorium. Also, Nancy Langston is giving a lecture on Thursday at 1 o'clock in the Keweenaw Great Lakes Research Center here on campus. And what's the title of your talk?
Oh, toxics, mobilization, and mining.
Toxics, mobilization, and mining. I think she's still working on it. Anyway, and I hope this is the beginning of many events that community members as well as people at Michigan Tech can join in, and we can start to have a really robust discussion of a lot of the issues that people want to be talking about. So let me introduce Tom here. Tom Powers is a resource economist. He's been working at the University of Montana for many years. He was chair of the Department of Economics. Since his retirement about 5 years ago, he has been working as a consultant to communities who are looking forward to or concerned about mining in their communities. He works as an economist, helping them assess some of the economic impacts. Recently, he's been working in New Mexico on uranium issues with Oxfam in Central America on new mining projects there. And he's also worked in Minnesota in the Iron Range around some concerns about the economics of mining, the new mining going on in the Iron Range. Recently, he just completed a study, many of you are probably aware of this, for Friends of the Land of the Keweenaw on the economic impacts of mining in the Western Upper Peninsula. And the title of that study is The Economic Impacts of Renewed Copper Mining in the Western Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is going to be the subject of his talk tonight. I should add that he's also the author of several books. I'm just going to mention 3 of them that you might be interested in. The more recent ones, one is called Accounting for Mother Nature. He's a co-author of that from Stanford University Press. A second, the title is Post-Cowboy Economics from Island Press. He's a co-author of that book. And then he's an author of Lost Landscapes and Failed Economies from Island Press. And I've looked at a couple of these books. They're really interesting, and I think they're pertinent to some of the issues that we talk about here today. So we're really grateful to Folk for allowing us to steal his time today to present on campus, because we think it's really important that we all engage in these discussions with the community. It's a great time for the community of the university to come together and begin this kind of discussion. So with that, I'm going to introduce Tom, and his talk is called The Economic Anomaly of Mining, Treasure, and Tears.
Okay, let's see if whoops. Hopefully it won't go out entirely. I think the sound is working, so let me charge ahead. Thank you for coming and risking the digestion of your dinner, or risking dozing off because you had one more glass of wine than you probably should have. As you can tell from the title of the talk, I'm planning to talk not only about the obvious benefits associated with mining, and I'm going to be primarily talking about metal mining, but also some of the negative aspects associated with mining, which has led to what I've labeled the economic anomaly of mining. That's actually the title of a chapter that I wrote for New Mexico Technical University 5 years or so ago. Because I'm going to be talking about some of the negative aspects of mining, I want to begin sort of on the defensive. To a lot of people, especially those from areas where there's a significant heritage of mining, even mentioning the fact that there might be some downsides is taken as a sign of regional disloyalty or an attack on an important economic contribution of previous generations, or really straightforward a sign of disloyalty to the region and its history. So let me begin by saying that I come from a metal mining family. This is a picture taken from the shore of Lake Michigan, just outside the community I grew up in, Bayview, part of the city of Milwaukee, where I spent the first 18 years of my life. My father was a metallurgical engineer who graduated from an engineering school, Lehigh University, and as a result of mysteries I never understood, I ended up going to the same engineering school, but getting a degree in a much more ethereal topic, namely physics. The playground for me and my siblings and friends when I was growing up on the shores of Lake Michigan, just a couple blocks from my house, were the slag heaps that the Milwaukee Iron Company conveniently dumped into Lake Michigan at the heyday of their operation of the Bayview Rolling Mill. The Catholic school and church I went to was built to serve the people working at that mill. The slag heap combined with the wave action of Lake Michigan created a perfectly dangerous playground for young boys in the sense of building caves back into the slag heap where we could build our forts and play. Let me try again. I also, instead of, if we go 2 blocks the other direction from my house in Bayview, I went to sleep every night for the first 18 years of my life until I went away to engineering school, to the thump, the soft thump that shook the foundation of my house in my 3rd floor bedroom softly every night from the Bayview Drop Forge. My father was in Milwaukee to help operate a new firm, the Maynard Electric Steel Casting Company, and he spent his entire professional life serving the foundries, dozens of foundries, providing technical assistance to them across 40-some years of professional life in Milwaukee. So I don't come from a family that hates mining or hates basic industry or is somehow prejudiced against it. I've also lived for 45 years in a mining state, Montana, where the most spectacular of Montana's mining operations, Butte Anaconda operations, stretched from Butte and Anaconda at the headwaters of the Clark Fork River to Missoula, Montana, where I've lived for 45 years. It's the nation's longest Superfund site and probably the most expensive. Unfortunately, the Anaconda Company also built a dam in Missoula to provide electricity to a lumber mill that was producing the timbers for its mining operation in Butte. And so Missoula was able to accumulate a century of toxic waste behind that dam, which was only recently, in the last 5 years, removed. Let me give you an outline of where I want to go this evening. I want to talk about the promise of mining, the search for treasure, the realization of that treasure, and the prosperity that it can bring. But I also want to talk about the economic reality of mining. That's where the word anomaly comes in the talk, is that despite that treasure, despite that promise of prosperity and the high wages, big payrolls associated with it, metal mining has been associated with considerable economic instability, ongoing, dramatic, labor-displacing technology, constantly reducing the workforce that's required for the operation of the mines, the very mobility of the mining workforce for good economic reasons, mobility motivated for good economic reasons, leads to dispersal or leakage of the benefits one would expect for the local community away from the local community. Finally, metal mining is land intensive. It often dramatically modifies the earth, leading to significant problems of waste disposal, water pollution, and the processing of the ores, significant air pollution. All of that environmental damage is not just an aesthetic concern. It's not just that the place isn't as beautiful as it used to be, or the air doesn't smell as nice as we would like it to be. It's not an aesthetic concern. It's a straightforward, very important economic concern. I'm going to talk about some of the economic implications of that downside, and then in very general terms, talk about a rational way to evaluate proposals for new mining. So that's the plot, and I'll start running as fast as I can here. I think most of us know what the promise of mining is. There's concentrated wealth in the ground. I mean, that's what partly led Christopher Columbus and the Spaniards to come exploring what they didn't think was a new world. A lot of the Spanish conquistadors were searching for the fabled golden cities that were lost somewhere out in the desert southwest. Lewis and Clark, part of their charge from Jefferson was to search for mineral deposits, etc. Mining pays some of the highest wages that blue-collar workers could ever hope to enjoy. And also as a result of the character of our taxing system and sometimes the character of the ownership of the mineral itself leads to a significant flow of revenues to state and local governments. That makes it, those attractive economic features makes it very easy for mine developers to present mining as an offer that's too good to be refused. There's treasure to be obtained, incredibly high wages to be earned by workers, and an easing of the burden of governing by providing government with ongoing significant flow of revenues. Montana's official title is the treasure state. Now that the treasure has partly disappeared, although prosperity hasn't, they now present themselves, part of their branding is not the treasure state anymore, but big sky country. So instead of looking at the earth and what was done to it, we're to look at the sky and the spectacular scenery that it provides. The seal in the middle of Montana's flag has with it, besides a plow, a pick and a shovel, and in Spanish, much to the horror of the English-only folks in Montana, in Spanish, the words gold and silver. Treasure state, that's what mining is all about, is pursuing that gift of nature, the treasure that's there for the taking. And you're going to see a lot of these squiggly lines. If that makes you dizzy, or makes you think you're in an economics class, just close your eyes. I'll try and say what I think those squiggly lines tell us. And you should get the gist without trying to puzzle through what the squiggly lines are doing. This just shows average pay for all wage and salary jobs across, in this case, Michigan. And also shows, going back to 1969, and I didn't pick that arbitrarily because something horrible or better happened in 1969. That's when the federal government began collecting data at the county level so that we have a history of that. And then above that, average pay in metal mining jobs. And I didn't end it in 1990 because something spectacularly good or spectacularly bad happened. Into the year 2000, the number of jobs in metal mining and the part of the gross national product coming from metal mining had declined so far that the federal government ceased reporting in the most popularly used data sets anyways on metal mining. Instead, they report on mining as a whole and oil and gas extraction, no surprise, and then all other mining. So as of the year 2000, it's not easy to get at data dealing with metal mining. The point is, you can see the huge difference at times. Sometimes the pay associated with metal mining is 40% above that in the average job in Michigan. Obviously, a very positive aspect to make people and communities drool over the idea of lots of those jobs. And depending on how one looks at it, in this case, I'm going all the way back to 1929, looking at the real payroll. So inflation has been taken out of this. And in all mineral extraction. And I did cut it off in 1980 because something terrible was about to happen. But now we're looking at all mineral extraction, so oil and gas is actually in here too, along with sand and gravel, coal mining, etc. But you can see the promise here too of payrolls just going, from less than $200 million, going up and up and up, reaching towards $1.6 billion over that lengthy period of time. Somewhat uneven, but still, an incredible promise in terms of a terrific amount of income being pumped into families' budgets. one of the problems is some of the fluctuations in that last line is, one of the problems is, I think that's right, is that promise, it's probably one of the biggest economic problems, is that promise isn't reliable. We're used to people talking about the boom and bust in mining, and we'll see the bust in the Upper Peninsula. But besides the boom and the bust meaning it's gone, and it, as far as we know, ain't coming back. In addition to that, there's something economists more recently have talked about as the flicker in the payroll over time, or the flicker in the revenues going to government over time. A flicker caused by fluctuations in international metal markets that leave metal prices to fluctuate, which lead the profitability of operating parts of mines or entire mines to go from being very positive to not being profitable at all. And mines, in response to that changing profitability, adjusting their labor force and production in turn. Here's one of those crazy squiggly lines all over the place. Just look at the top one to begin with. Now we're going from 1960 to 2010, so I'm going past 1980. This is total metal mining in the Upper Peninsula, the number of jobs, including processing facilities. And there's some instability, but at fairly high levels, 7,000 jobs. And then a crash that ended up dropping down to around 1,000 jobs. So 6 out of 7 jobs being lost. That would have looked worse early on between 1960 and 1978 or so, as iron mining and processing took a dive, recovered, and took a dive, and remained at relatively low levels. As iron mining was taking a dive, the White Pine copper facility was coming online, so holding up the employment numbers. Then when it took the dive, iron mining was coming back, holding it up for a little bit of time, and then both were declining. The White Pine mine, of course, going out of business altogether. That fluctuation and ultimate very steep decline has an incredible impact, obviously, on communities and households. So it's one thing to talk about the high wages, but if the high wages are unreliable, the impact of those high wages on the local economy is going to be different than wages that people think that they can count on. We'll come back to that. Just to give you a feeling for the role of copper prices, this is copper prices, inflation taken out, and contrasting that to employment at the White Pine mine to your south, although it turns out that Houghton County was impacted by that mining. Notice that when the mine was open, copper prices were steeply rising. They took a huge dive, but recovered and rose again, almost, in fact, back to peak levels. And that's when the employment at the mine reached its peak. Copper prices then took a very steep dive, and the mine largely shut down. Copper prices recovered, the mine recovered, copper prices took a dive again, the mine shut down. Copper prices matter, metal prices matter, but the history over the 20th century into the first 20th century doesn't give us much hope that the prices will ever be stable. Yet every projection that is ever made for a proposed copper mine, or silver mine, or gold mine, or uranium mine, always projects employment and tax payments and payroll on the assumption that copper prices will be steady and that production will be steady. That is a wonderful dream. That's not the reality. Notice I have some question marks here as to where prices are headed. During this period, in the early 2000s, or I guess I'm supposed to call them the aughts, now that we've moved beyond into the teens, we need new language in terms of what early 2000 means. But this run-up, not just copper prices, nickel prices, uranium prices, gold prices, silver prices, was taken as evidence that we're in a new world. This is a permanent, long-run trend tied to the development of China and to a certain extent India, and now prices are going to be steady. Well, there's been a couple of hiccups that suggest that may not be the case, and the slowdown in the Chinese economy tends to reinforce that. If one looks at what actually was being produced by copper industry in the United States, again, going back to 1900 and coming forward to 2010, that's not encouraging either. To the extent that employment is tied to the level of production, both in the mines and the processing facilities, what the negative numbers down here indicate is the depth of the fall from the previous high points. Notice that that's just highlighting some of the biggest declines, the biggest hiccups. That's the flicker that economists are worried about, is what do communities do when this is going on? How do households cope? How do businesses that depend on those households cope? How do governments cope? That sort of instability is part of the metal markets, international metal markets, into which any copper mine or gold or silver mine or uranium mine has to operate. The second problem that has caused considerable suffering or disruption in communities reliant on metal mining has been an amazing ongoing growth in labor displacing technological change. Now, I'm not attacking technological change. That's pretty hard to do. Workers clearly would not be being paid 75. Latest figures I've seen for miners in Alaska is above $100,000 per year. They would not be being paid that level of pay just because they're miners, just because mining companies love their workers and, want to share the wealth. The fact is that ongoing technological change has enabled mines to share part of the constantly rising productivity, but at a cost. At the cost of the mine hiring fewer and fewer workers, and over time, systematically laying off some of those workers, which is one of the reasons that one finds surprisingly high unemployment rates in mining-dependent communities. Once laid off, workers know that it's almost impossible to imagine a job that's going to pay as much. They hang on hoping to be rehired. Instead, what they see is more people being laid off. Some of the increase in productivity is a result of chemical mining. Most uranium that's being produced in the United States is being produced by in situ chemical mining, pumping solvents into the earth to dissolve the uranium and then pumping them out. Most processing of gold these days is chemical, not thermal or mechanical, using cyanide to dissolve the gold and then precipitate it back out. Amazing improvements in the processing as well as the mining of metals. Huge increases in investment. approaching $1 billion or $2 billion before any mining takes place. The industry has just become more and more capital intensive, less labor intensive. Gargantuan equipment being used, whether it's the trucks or the electric shovels, just amazing. And that's not at an end. Proposals for the Resolution mine outside of Superior, Arizona, calls for a larger automated robotic mine, blockade mining, with explosive charges, the truck driving, the operations that used to be filled by blue-collar workers as opposed to engineers and other professionals. Most of the blue-collar jobs, well-paid blue-collar jobs, material moving, driving the trucks, operating the equipment, is being displaced with robotics and automations. College-level kids sitting with a joystick in the central office, controlling both the placing of the charges and the moving of the ore, etc. At least according to the mining journals, it puts at risk the high-paid blue-collar jobs, replacing them with even higher-paid, technologically oriented computer programmers, people skilled in repair of automated equipment and robotics, etc. One can see some of that improvements in labor productivity by looking back, and this just goes back to 72 to 2012. The blue line is copper mining employment across the United States. And the red line is the copper actually being produced. Not surprising, when less copper was being produced, employment plummeted. What's disturbing is once production picked up, employment continued to plummet. Despite the significant increase in copper production, employment continued to fall. Of course, once copper production was falling too, one had an ongoing decline in employment. Again, looking nationwide, employment falling from about 36,000 jobs in the copper industry down to around 6,000. So initially 5 out of 6 workers being displaced within some small recovery. If one puts that in terms of the number of workers to produce 1,000 metric tons of contained copper in a year, at its worst, the number of workers fell in the early or mid-70s from 22 workers being needed to 6 workers being needed. And then some recovery, with whether this is due to reorganization within the mine or operating mines with less than optimal levels of production or employment is unclear. What the mining journals suggest is that they expect ongoing improvements in labor productivity. The other interesting thing is that miners ain't stupid. And this is somewhat of a change in behavior or culture or the impact of mining on heritage. Miners increasingly don't live near the mines at which they work. Some of that's due to the fact that mining is taking place in increasingly remote locations where man camps are being built and workforces are being flown in for 2-week stays, and then the workers have a week off and the shifts are switching so the mine can operate 24/7, close to 365 days a year. But a lot of it's due to the fact that mining workers, number one, can afford to live in, if you want, a better neighborhood than an area where the environment is being degraded as a result of the mining and processing operation. They can afford to live in a better neighborhood, number one. They realize that if the mine shuts down or the environmental degradation reaches a certain point, their investment in their home is threatened. And so they try to protect their investment by living at some distance from mines and commuting very long distances, a commute that's justified by the very high wages that they're being paid. That's fine. That's rational economic behavior. But what it means is that the economic benefits are unlikely to be local in character. They're going to be diffused over a much larger area, and the local area is likely to see much more limited impacts than was associated with mines in the past. This is just an indication of that. This is looking at the commuting patterns associated with workers at the White Pine mine in Ontonagon County, just to the south. At its peak, when the mine was operating at its peak, something between a third and 40% of the payroll was not going to households in Ontonagon County. They were going up here or to other adjacent counties. Even though White Pine was built as a place for the miners to live, only about a quarter of the workers lived there. Only half of the workers lived in the county, and the rest commuted from other counties considerable distances. The result was this part of the payroll didn't go to people in the local area. It went instead to counties some distance. This decline of the leakage out, going to near zeros when the first time the White Pine mine shut down, going to near zero again when the White Pine mine finally did shut down. This was shown on the left. This was the time profile of employment at the White Pine mine with the first shutdown and then the second shutdown following dives in the price of copper. Whoops. One other aspect that I mentioned before, the capital-intensive nature of copper mining, is that most of the benefits, most of the value created at the copper mine, and this is taken from data associated with the proposed Copperwood mine, most of the value is not associated with wages and salaries. The bulk of it goes as property income to the people who develop the mine, own the minerals, etc. A lot of it goes to purchase necessary inputs like the gargantuan equipment that's needed, which isn't produced locally. So that the part of the value created locally is just a fraction of the total value, the total treasure, if you want, being produced. I'm talking too much. Let me just move on. What I wanted to point out is something similar, but also all this does is look at the direct effect. What's actually happening at the mine site? What's happening as a result of purchases by the mine? What's happening as a result of the spending associated with the miners spending their payroll, and then adding all those up? What I wanted to point out is how you measure the impact of the mine depends crucially on what you choose. If you choose total value of output, you get the biggest number, but most of that value doesn't even touch the local economy. It's going for the purchase of the equipment, it's going for payments to the people who bought the bonds and the stock in the company, it's going to the people who own the minerals and are receiving the royalties. The only part that we know circulates within the local economy is the payroll part. And, you know, look at the difference between them. I mean, one ends up seeing something 6 or 7 times as large if one looks at it in terms of the value of output, as opposed to looking at what workers, what part of that wealth, what part of that treasure workers are actually receiving. All of those, the instability, the labor displacing technology, the capital nature of the mine, I'm leaving something out. All of those matter in terms of what the community experiences. That instability in payroll, instability in revenues to the government discourages local investment. That's one of the reasons miners don't invest in the local economy. They put their homes somewhere else, is they don't know how long that mine will be paying them that wage. The same with government. Local school boards are hesitant to invest if they don't know how long the stream of tax revenues coming to them is going to last. They're afraid the mine will shut down and leave them holding the bonds. In commuting, I've already talked about the employment of non-residents drains away many of the benefits. Displaced workers hanging on leads to higher joblessness rates, higher unemployment rates. Company town mentality. If you're relying on an outsider coming in and providing you with jobs, that has an impact that tends to discourage an entrepreneurial approach where a population is hunting for ways in which they can supplement their salaries or provide employment for themselves. The net result is what we see in many, many mining areas, which is not prosperity, but underdevelopment, rundown infrastructure, and economic distress. If one looks across all of the mining-dependent communities in the United States, I did this several years ago, looking at all of the mines, all the communities, all the counties where 20% or more of earnings were coming from mineral operations, and comparing that to communities that aren't mining dependent. One doesn't find higher wages, one finds lower levels of income. Despite the high-paid jobs, one finds higher unemployment rates. Despite the flows of revenues to governments, one finds run-down local infrastructure, slower growth in jobs, income, and population. And that includes almost all of the areas we recognize as mining dependent. Some of them, like Appalachia, the nation's first mining district and longest mining district, has become synonymous with poverty, such that the federal government has been working on for decades, with Republican and Democratic presidents trying to do something with the poverty. Now, I mean, that's a startling and disturbing characteristic of a very important mining area. And we need to understand how that could happen. That's what the anomaly in the title of the talk is all about. But you can go to my backyard, Butte, Montana, and Anaconda, Montana. Not hardly prosperous, and it hasn't been prosperous for a very long period of time, long before the mine shut down. But one could look at Silver City in New Mexico or the Globe Miami area in Arizona, both of which areas I worked on. One can look at the Iron Range in Minnesota that's attempting to go through a renaissance, but not fundamentally changing the character. One can look at the uranium belts, the gold and silver towns, many of which now become amusement parks because to take advantage of the, I don't know, Western charm or adventure associated with the ghost house. We're running out of time. I was going to try and document how it is that growth in personal income, population, per capita income, total earnings, and mining-dependent communities have lagged behind how the level of per capita income, average income, in mining-dependent communities has lagged behind. But let me finish so we can go after some questions. Whoa, come back. Rational thinking about mining. What I suggest here is we should think like a mining company. Mining companies don't develop all deposits of minerals that they find. Many of the mineral deposits that are now being developed have been known for a very long period of time. Mining companies look at them. They look at the technologies available, the cost of extraction and processing, the value of the final product. And if the costs are greater than the value that can be produced, they leave the mineral deposit in the ground. If the costs exceed the benefits, it is not irrational. It's not a sign that you're being anti-mining or have some deep-seated hatred of mineral development to walk away from it. Mineral companies regularly do that. And the most dramatic recent example is a project I've been working on up in Alaska, the Bristol Bay region, the proposed pebble mine that has been controversial for a very long period of time. It's supposed to be the largest copper deposit known in North America. Incredibly high quality in terms of copper content, well above 1%. That phrase, rare, magnitude, and quality, came from Anglo-American, the 50% partner in the development, a large multinational British mining company, who had the job. They got their 50% interest by agreeing to fund the development of the mine. And by the end of this year, they're supposed to have invested something like $568 million in exploration and development of that mine. In June of this year, they announced that they were walking away from all of it. That doesn't mean that the mine will not be go ahead. The remaining partner, the Pebble Limited Partnership, told their stockholders that this was a windfall to the stockholders because now they had inherited that $684 million that Anglo-American had invested, and they had gotten it for free. That you always have to put a positive spin on losing your only partner who was putting up all the capital to develop the mine. But the Anglo-American praised the deposit, said that they thought it from a geological point of view, from a mining point of view, it was spectacular. But compared to all the other mines that they had under development, given the risks associated with Pebble Mine as opposed to the particular, to the many other mines they had under development, that Pebble Mine was simply too risky and too costly, and they were going to write off their investment and abandon their share of the project altogether. I think that citizens should take the same point of view, but do it from a public interest point of view. Recognize your obvious benefits, but not enter the crazy anti-economic world of free lunches, where mining only produces benefits and there are no costs. In general, and this is partly why economics is called dismal science. And general economists are always saying there is no such thing as a free lunch. If there were, we wouldn't need economics, we wouldn't need businesses, we would just all get what we wanted because everything was free. But we have to make choices. And we have to make choices because there are costs as well as benefits. And what citizens have to do, from a public interest point of view, is to weigh the clear benefits, economic benefits associated with mining, but also recognize the potential cost to the community, and then make their decision and urge their representatives in government to do the same thing. Thank you.